For more on the latest Mideast conflict, we're joined live from London by George Galloway, a member of the British Parliament representing the Respect Party. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, you're not one to mince your words when it comes to Israel. So what do you think could bring about a ceasefire?
Well, the United States holds the key, and Europe has a smaller secondary key. Europe has on the table a special protocol which effectively extends membership of the European Union to Israel, at least so far as trading arrangements are concerned. They should publicly tear this agreement up. The United States supplied all the bombers and all the missiles that have killed or maimed well over 1,000 people, a very considerable number of them women and children, following a long period of siege of the Gaza Strip, which is one of the most densely populated pieces of earth on the planet. And the United States, and Europe for that matter, gave Israel a green light both for the siege and for the savage war crime which is taking place in front of our eyes. And, you know, half-hearted, feeble calls for a ceasefire that are then ignored very publicly by the Israeli cabinet this morning are simply not sufficient. If this, for example, were happening in Georgia and the culprit was Russia, then you can be sure that the international community would be taking swift and decisive action. And Russia is not dependent on the West, but Israel is absolutely dependent on the West.
Israeli officials say that they're only targeting Hamas and that the Palestinian people are not their enemies. What do you say about this?
Well, they're liars, and they've been lying for 60 years. They denied there was even the existence of a Palestinian people. Golda Meir, the Prime Minister in the 1960s, said, and I quote, "There is no such thing as a Palestinian, and there never has been." And for 60 years they've been allowed to occupy territory by violent military means in defiance of international law. Israel has broken more United Nations Security Council resolutions than all the other countries of the world put together. And this turning of a blind eye to lawlessness, acts of terrorism, for that's what this is. You know, the idea that they're targeting Hamas is belied by your own news coverage and by the news coverage of every news organization in the world. You've all seen the babies being carried into the hospitals, which are themselves denuded of blood supplies, medical equipment, even salaries for the doctors and the nurses. You know, everyone knows that these are not Hamas, these are babies and children and students being blown away outside the United Nations' own college where they were students. 4 sisters in the same house killed in their beds whilst asleep. Why? Because they were living next to a mosque which was targeted by the Israeli Air Force. Of course, the West is gravely weakened in its position, its moral position, because this is precisely the kind of mass murder which Western countries themselves are guilty of, both in Iraq and continuing today in Afghanistan, where civilians are regularly shredded like pieces of butcher meat by their most high-powered weaponry in the world. And so when Israel says, well, we're only doing what you did in Iraq, well, in that sense at least, they're telling the truth.
Mr. Galloway, you've been quoted as saying that Israel should be treated like South Africa was during the apartheid regime, which is shunned by many countries and boycotts. Isn't this a different situation, and what are you proposing?
Well, the person who described Israel as an apartheid state was the former American President Jimmy Carter. He wrote a book describing Israel as an apartheid state, and the apartheid is many-fold. Inside the Green Line, as we call it, 1948 borders of Israel, the Arab citizens of Israel are such second-class citizens that the current foreign minister of Israel, maybe the next prime minister, Madame Livni, said that the Israeli Arabs would have to see their future elsewhere, beyond the borders of Israel. They want to ethnically cleanse even their own citizens, one of whom you were featuring in your package there, who happen to have an ethnicity which is Arab. But of course, for more than 40 years, millions of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza have been treated, in a sense, worse than the citizens of the Bantustans of apartheid South Africa, because not only are they denied all civil rights, including the right to vote, because of course if they could vote, even though they've been effectively part of Israel as occupied territories for more than 40 years, they'd vote out these criminals who are killing and starving them. But they are regularly and devastatingly subjected to military aggression of the kind